All right, hello and welcome to this training. As you can see from the title, what we're going to be covering today is the hidden power of doing nothing. And as you can see from the overview, what we're going to be talking about more specifically is first the overview itself, then the clutter problem, the purge ritual, the new input, the review, and your action items for the day or the next few days. So without further ado, let's get started and talk about the clutter problem. So most people operate with a mind that's basically carrying more than it can handle. The weight builds slowly, and you wake up already thinking about unfinished tasks, old messages, and some loose plans for the week. And as the day goes on, more gets added, and the next day, some more. And after a while, your mind starts to feel crowded, and even basic decisions take more effort than they actually should. And you don't really always notice this buildup is actually happening, but you feel the effects. You lose focus more quickly. You jump between tasks without finishing them. You feel a mild strain that sits in the background of everything you do and is the signal that your mind is holding too much. When the mind stays in this state, new goals don't stick. You don't have the motivation to chase them. New habits fade away pretty quickly, and you basically try to force progress, but the system is already at capacity. There's literally no room for direction, and you're trying to move forward with a mind that's running out of space. It's almost like your computer is full, completely full in terms of its hard drive, and you try to cram more in there. It's just not going to happen. And at the very least, your computer is just going to be running pretty slowly. So if you want to shift your internal state, you need space. You don't get clarity by adding more thoughts or more pressure. You get it by removing what's sitting in the way. Space gives you the ability to hold one clear instruction without your attention really collapsing under a bunch of different competing demands. So doing nothing is really the first step towards creating that space. You need to stop filling every moment and stop reacting to every stimulus. And when that noise drops, you can choose what to focus on instead of being pulled around. So your mind can get crowded without you even really realizing it. And before long, your inner world will start to feel overfilled. And you will keep adding new thoughts on top of old ones, and unfinished ideas will start piling up. And you're basically holding on to so much that you don't even notice how tightly you're actually gripping everything. And after a while, that noise will become so constant that it starts to feel like this is your life, like it's normal. You're just thinking all the time, but none of these thoughts actually go anywhere. They just stack up layer after layer, and they don't move you forward in any direction at all. And once those layers get thick enough, even simple tasks will start to feel harder than they actually should. There's no breathing room between your thoughts. Nothing fresh can actually land because there's simply no space for it. There's no space for any new ideas or any way to basically move forward in your life. And when your mind fills up like this, thinking becomes less like a smooth process and more like trying to move around in a room where furniture has been pushed too close together. You're just going to basically keep bumping into things all the time, and you'll lose track of what you came in for. And even a simple idea will start to feel like it requires a ton of effort because it has to push through everything you're already carrying. And since you're juggling so much internally, the quality of your attention will also drop, and the quality of your focus, and the signal in general will get weaker. And that's when people start losing interest in things that they used to really care about, or find themselves stuck basically staring at a screen without knowing what they were supposed to be doing in the first place. And it's just so many thoughts at the same time that you just freeze. And this is also when a lot of people start to call themselves burned out, when in reality it's just that they're holding so much in their mind and in their thoughts that of course they're going to feel burned out. Of course they're going to feel like they can't move in any direction. Of course they're going to feel like everything is too much. So the more the clutter builds, the more your focus breaks apart into very scattered pieces, and you start shifting your attention before you've finished anything. You open tabs that stay open for days, and you write notes that you don't return to. You set some goals that you never look at again. And each shift takes a little bit of strength. And actually, science has proven this. Anytime you shift your attention from one thing to the other, you lose a little bit of energy. And this is oversimplified, but that's a topic for a different day. And the cumulative effect is that by the time you want to do something that's actually meaningful, you're already tired. And it's like you're running small errands in your brain and in your mind all day long, and then you wonder why you can't really focus or why you can't move forward. And that mental clutter will create a heaviness essentially that settles into your thoughts and makes even the simple tasks you need to get done feel like these humongous projects. And you'll notice this on days when everything feels slightly slower or when even choosing a next step feels like work. Your mind essentially has to sift through too much noise before it finds a direction. And when it takes that long to locate a clear point of focus, you begin avoiding tasks altogether. As I said, you start freezing, you start, or flying. It's not flying, but basically escaping it. So it's either fight, flight, or freeze. And it's less that you're unwilling and more that you feel weighed down before you even begin. And so when you're so stressed out, when there's so much going on in your mind, basically the same kind of hormone shows up as when you're actually afraid of something, as if a tiger has shown up in front of you. You're either gonna fight, flight, or freeze. And you're doing this to yourself essentially in today's world, because most of us are not surrounded by any dangerous animals that can actually, attack us. I don't want to say the other word, but you get the gist here. So this constant load will just drain you steadily, and every open loop will take a tiny piece of your energy to hold in place. And one by one, they don't necessarily seem like much, but then they accumulate, and that drain will start becoming obvious. And you'll feel it when you wake up already tired, or when you can't really fully concentrate or focus on anything, no matter how hard you try. The body responds to mental clutter the same way it responds to physical clutter. It tightens up, your thinking basically narrows, and you use more effort for less work. And by the end of the day, you're spent without even having created anything of substance, anything of value, without actually doing anything. And the mind tends to collect residue from these unresolved things. A decision you haven't made, or a message you avoided answering, an errand you've been putting off for a while. Each one of those stays active somewhere in the background, like an open tab in a different window. And you may not be thinking about them consciously, but they still remain there, and they drain basically your RAM, in the RAM of your brain, essentially. And when there are enough of these open loops, they glue themselves together and they create this general sense of unease. So you don't always know what you're carrying. You just basically feel that you're carrying something. And when your mind is cluttered, your perception starts bending as well. You might interpret basically neutral situations through a lens of agitation and of anger. You might assume that pressure, you might assume that there's pressure where none of it actually exists, and simple requests will start to feel demanding, and just ordinary days in general will start to feel strangely full, and generally you would feel like you can't actually take on life. And a cluttered mind doesn't really perceive reality clearly. It absorbs everything as additional weight, as additional load to everything that you're already carrying. And after a while, this will shape the way you experience the world. The external begins to basically feel heavier and more dangerous because the internal is. And so the noise becomes a kind of a invisible fog. And this is also what people mean when they say that they have this mental fog. You can think, but the thinking isn't necessarily sharp. Ideas arrive, but they don't stay long enough to develop. And your intuition basically gets quiet. You sense that there's something underneath the agitation, but you don't really quite reach it. And it's similar to hearing someone talking through a wall in the other room. There's sound, but the message doesn't really land. You can't really hear it. And you end up living in reaction to whatever's loudest in your head instead of responding to what matters. And that clutter flattens the depth of your thinking. You lose the sense of that inner spaciousness that allows for insight or creativity or even just direction. And you begin to operate on the surface of things because that's all there's actually room for. And when everything inside you feels compressed, nothing can really expand. So a cluttered mind thickens in a way that makes reflection difficult as well. You're thinking all day, but you're rarely reaching a real conclusion to anything. You're planning constantly, but you're rarely starting. Or you start, but you rarely finish. And you're dreaming occasionally, but never grounding the dream. And there's no room for the idea to open and unfold because the mind keeps circling around the noise instead of the signal. And this creates a kind of stagnation where nothing really moves forward, even though you feel like you're mentally active all the time and maybe even physically. And the most concerning part is how easily this state drowns out the quiet voice inside you that usually guides your direction. And as the load increases, your system just shifts gradually into a low-level crisis mode, essentially. You respond to small things with quick emotional spikes. You get irritated faster. You lose patience sooner. Your energy feels thin and stretched. And there's a steady hum of basically internal fatigue, like a fan in the background. And because this becomes familiar, you begin treating it as your baseline when it's actually just a sign of cognitive excess. So your sense of preference, desire, and inner alignment actually starts to get quieter, and you stop hearing what you actually want. You start defaulting to basically whatever's easiest or whatever's yelling for your attention in the current moment, and you have no time to actually think about the future or plan for it. And when the inner signal fades, it becomes incredibly difficult to shift into a new phase of life because you've lost the clarity you need to choose it. And this is the moment where doing nothing begins making sense, right? Emptiness doesn't require any effort. It doesn't demand any focus or productivity. It removes instead of adding. And when you create even a little bit of that emptiness and quietness, the pressure inside your mind will start to soften and your thoughts will start to settle. And you see more clearly what was clutter and what was real. And once the space clears and once that space actually appears, you finally have room for a new reality to really take shape. And this is what we're going to be covering in the next section, is basically clearing out the excess so that the mind can breathe again. So let's talk about the purge ritual. So clearing your mind really starts in a pretty simple way. You basically just sit with yourself in silence for long enough to notice all the thoughts and unfinished tasks or unfinished open loops start boiling up. And believe me, if you really turn off all stimuli and just sit there, things will start coming to the surface and you will start feeling this urgency and pressure. And that's what you're looking for. You want that urgency and pressure to come up. And why? Because we're going to use it in just a bit. So most people don't stop long enough to actually see that and to actually allow themselves to feel that urgency and pressure, which is why it builds up so easily and why it's constantly building up in the background. Once you catch it though, once you actually pay attention to it and stop yourself for a moment to actually notice it, you can finally do something about it. It's a slow removal of pressure. You're lowering the volume in your head so that the important things can actually stand out again. And I mean that in a very literal sense. When you clear some space in your head, and when you quiet down for a bit, your thinking becomes clearer. Your attention doesn't scatter as much, and the weight you're carrying internally becomes far easier to manage. But you need to stop for a moment to actually notice that and stop adding things. So just take a day. It couldn't be a Sunday. A lot of people say that some of the things I say are not applicable to people working a 9 to 5, which obviously that's a discussion for another day. But you can take any day off and just take a moment and sit down and be quiet for a moment and notice all the pressure and all the urgency and all the unfinished open loops and tasks and open doors that you've left basically from running around mentally, but also physically. Let them come up. And once you've done that, the way you start clearing that space, the way you actually move forward and move in a direction is writing things down. It's pretty simple. And yes, it feels almost too simple, but it works every time. And I think everybody could do this. So you're taking whatever's been looping in your head and giving it a physical place to sit. No structure, no filtering or censoring, just a clean unload, basically a mental dump, essentially. So a brain dump. So you'll see that if you start doing this, your thoughts will stop bouncing around once they land on paper. And once you actually have to write them down as you're thinking them. And it's surprising how much tension will start to disappear when you're not holding everything in your working memory. You can see what you're dealing with rather than carrying it by instinct and memory. And when you write down everything without trying to fix anything, you get a clearer picture of what's actually running in the background. And some of it will look trivial once you see it written out. Some of it will remind you that you've been dragging certain tasks for way too long. Either way, the pressure will drop. And there's a moment where you will feel your mind not pressing forward so hard. And once you start doing it, you'll almost physically feel the mental unload or mental load finally easing up, right? And I personally try to have as little as possible in my memory. I don't want to remember things. I don't want to have to remember things. So everything is written down either in Notion or in my reminders app on my phone, which actually also reminds me to put everything from there in Notion. So anytime I actually put down something in the reminders app of my phone, I also set a reminder to put those things in my Notion, especially if they're not some smaller tasks that I can get done in 5 minutes. So once you have a centralized place for all of these thoughts and all of these random tasks in your head, and you actually start actively putting and organizing everything in there, you'll be free from overthinking, and you'll be free from the overthinking that you have subjected yourself to for so long. And I'm not saying you should use Notion or anything like that for that matter. It has worked great for me, but you can use whatever basically works for you. The system you use is not that important, or how you organize the things, as long as you organize them and put them in somewhere that works for you, essentially. And what I'm saying is that you can't really figure out ways to move your life forward. You can't actually really think about the future and plan for the future if your brain is constantly busy with remembering trivial tasks and errands that you haven't done from 3 weeks ago. You're just constantly in catching up mode, essentially. You'll never be able to really look to the future, plan for the future, and actually take action for your future self now, because you're constantly catching up with tasks and things you're doing from the past, because you're constantly trying to remember everything. Now, after the writing itself, silence works as a second clearing tool. So even a few minutes of it can reset your mind. You step away from the noise, away from your screens, away from things that basically ask for your attention. And honestly, it will feel very odd at first. You're most likely used to constant input. And I'm not blaming you for it. Most people are addicted to constant input. It's a way to escape as well. We have to remember that. So once you sit in silence for a bit, you'll notice the internal pace slowing down, and you're not being pulled in every direction, because you're sitting in that quiet, and you've unloaded everything in your head, and now you're just sitting there. And what you're doing is basically you're giving your brain the first real break it's had all day, or maybe all month for that matter. And in that silence, your thoughts will start spreading out instead of clumping together. And you don't have to make them really do anything. They settle on their own once the constant stimulus stops. Once you stop constantly putting things in your brain. It's a very simple effect, but it matters. You can think straighter, you can see what's useful, you can see what's just noise, you can see what's not useful, what you need to just leave behind. And even better, you can see what you don't actually have to finish. And it feels less like wrestling with your mind and more like working with a system that finally has some room to breathe. And the next step is actually reducing how much stimulation you take in each day by default. So once you've unloaded everything, once you've sat in silence, once you've basically prioritized things and organized things and seen what actually, what actually matters and what doesn't and what can be left behind, then the next step is really reducing how much stimulation you take in each day by default so that it doesn't repeat again. So most people don't realize how much they're actually consuming until they try cutting back. Every random scroll or errand adds mental load. And when there are dozens of those moments that are stacked together, your mind ends up stretched thin, right? So reducing stimulation is incredibly effective because you're essentially lowering the baseline noise level so that your mind can actually function without straining all the time. So there's a few ways you can do that. The first one is taking a short digital fast, or a digital detox is how some people call it. And it does more than most people expect. And I'm not saying you need a long break of a week or something like that. Just a few hours every day without any social media or constant notifications is really already enough to create a noticeable change. And you're no longer reacting every few minutes because of that, because you're taking a break. And your attention will will learn to, or you will learn to keep your attention in one place. You will learn to not be checking your phone every 5 minutes. And better yet, never turn these notifications back on. You're not going to really miss out on anything important. And if somebody really wants to talk to you, they can always call you. Remember that at the end of the day, we have phones for a reason. People can just call you if something is really urgent. So after a brief fast, you might notice that your mind feels less crowded and your thoughts don't push against each other the way they did before. And there's enough space for them to actually form without pressure, without that urgency and that pressure of needing to do stuff. And another way to do this is through a content diet. Now, I do this by default at this point, and it works by basically limiting your input to a small set of intentional sources. So you're intentionally choosing specific people and specific topics and specific formats, and everything else gets cut. So this will create a controlled information environment, basically, where your mind only absorbs what supports your current direction. And you can start by listing 3 to 5 creators or sources whose work consistently aligns with where you're headed, right? And these should be people who help you think more clearly, not people who simply entertain or distract you. So, of course, there is a moment and time for entertainment. However, that should not be clumped together with the content that you're consuming to help you in moving forward in your direction. So once you have your list, commit to consuming only from those sources for the next few weeks or a week. And you can also try setting clear boundaries around the type of content itself. So if you're focusing on building a skill, try to consume only instructional or applied content. And if you're working on mindset, stick to philosophy or reflective writing or philosophy books. If you've spent the last few years consuming random content, your mind will really benefit from some concentrated input that points in one direction. And you'll also master subjects way faster that way. If you, for example, set this month as a philosophy month and all you do is literally read philosophy books and watch philosophy related content, whether that's videos or documentaries or whatever, you're going to master you're not necessarily going to master the subject of philosophy itself, but you're going to be way further than most people are on the subject. And I'm not going to lie, the restraint will most likely feel very uncomfortable at first because you're used to watching basically anything that grabs your attention, and now you're not doing it anymore. One thing you could also try is just literally watching just lectures for a month straight. And this will lectures and books only, and this will rewire your mindset. Now, it's going to feel uncomfortable because it's basically like a nutritional diet, but for the content you actually consume, not for the food you consume. So you'll feel the pull to check other channels or explore unrelated topics. And that pull is really part of the clutter you're trying to remove. Each time you resist it, you're training your attention to stay narrow and strong. And the discomfort will fade quickly once your mind actually adjusts to the reduced input. Over a few weeks, you will not want to necessarily check these videos as much. So the next step here is also physical clearing or clearing your environment around you or where you spend the most time. Now, if you're going to an office, clear your office, clear your desk at least. You can always clean that up. If you work from home, then clean up the room you're working from. Clean up everything, in fact, in your home. Just try to clear everything around you so that everything is clean and tidy. Because at the end of the day, a clean desk, a cleaned out corner, a cleaned out room, or even just an organized bag, like literally organizing your gym bag, for example, changes how your mind operates. You're really reducing the number of things that are asking for your attention. And it doesn't fix everything, but it definitely removes a layer of friction that you didn't realize was there, right? That you didn't necessarily realize is crowding your mind and crowding your thoughts. And you get a cleaner visual field, and in a way, a cleaner internal one as well. Because the lightness that follows feels very steady. Once you clean out a room, once you clear out your space in general, your desk, whatever it is, you'll feel this lightness. And it's a steady feeling, essentially. Your attention feels less pulled. You can look at one thing without your mind drifting towards everything else in the room. And this kind of environmental clearing will help you far more than most people assume. Now, next up are your emotions. And this is one subject that I don't think a lot of people talk about, but emotional residue also needs clearing. Now, a lot of people live they have a life where they haven't closed open loops with people around them, with the relationships they have. They have these open loops always in the background, things that they didn't discuss, conversations that they started and never finished. It's the leftover tension from things you haven't dealt with. And it might be irritation from a conversation or some kind of a worry you didn't want to examine. All these small emotional weights sit in the mind and take up real space. This is why actually a lot of people want closure after a relationship ends, if they didn't get the closure. It's because that weight stays in their mind. And it obviously prevents them from moving forward. Now, I'm not saying you have to analyze every emotion deeply. In fact, quite the opposite, I would say. But you should give them a brief moment of acknowledgement so that they stop circling back, right? This doesn't mean indulging the emotion, as I said. You're simply noticing it without really pushing it away, without suppressing it. It's just a short moment of honesty. And it looks pretty simple. For example, if you feel angry, literally, mentally, in your thoughts, admit to yourself that you feel angry. If you feel sad, literally just admit to yourself in your thoughts. You don't have to share it with anyone, but just admit to yourself that you feel sad. And once you see it, or in other words, once you notice the emotion usually loses its intensity because you've given it some space, right? You can imagine it almost as something that wants to be heard. The moment you hear it, the moment you acknowledge that it's trying to say something to you, it feels heard. And that's it. It quiets down, right? It no longer holds the same grip because you're not resisting it anymore. You're not trying to suppress it. You're not trying to push it away. And the internal resistance will start to drop, and you'll get back a bit of clarity that you didn't even realize you had lost because of it. And after that purge, the change can be pretty noticeable. Your thinking will get clearer. Your attention is more stable. The noise in your mind will drop far enough for you to actually be able to be aware and hear your thoughts again. And this is the environment where new ideas can actually take root and new patterns can actually form. And that emptiness is useful only if you fill it with something deliberate. So the next section will focus on how to choose that single input, because it will become the anchor for the reality you build next, right? So let's talk about the new input. Now, once you've cleared enough space, your mind becomes much easier to work with. And there's less noise, there's fewer stray thoughts pulling at you, and a stronger sense of internal quiet. And this is where a single clear instruction makes a real difference. So the mind likes direction. And when you give it one simple command, it tends to shape everything around that command without much resistance. And the key here is really choosing something specific enough to guide you, but simple enough that it doesn't create new clutter, right? A clean mind can hold one idea with surprising strength, but if you give it a complex kind of goal, then it will most likely go back to trying to escape and trying to basically suppress it or not focus on that, because it's just more than it can actually handle in the moment. So you start by actually choosing one thing or one thought that actually matters, and it doesn't need to have layers of meaning. It doesn't need to be complex. Just a simple directive will keep your attention steady through the day. And it can be a phrase. It can be a goal for the day. It could be a mantra. It could be just a maxim or a principle you want to operate from. This single idea becomes your anchor, right? And because you have reduced the internal noise, the anchor sits in your awareness without you having to force it there. And to do this, you just ask yourself what direction you want to lean towards right now or today. And when the idea feels clean and uncomplicated, that's a good sign. If you feel some kind of tension or confusion around it, it's probably too complex. So a simple directive tends to hold best. Now, one example is a domino goal. And a domino goal is the one outcome that, if you achieve it right now or today, knocks down several other goals at once, or at least makes the others a bit irrelevant. And so it's the priority that essentially carries the most weight. It gives your mind one clear target instead of spreading your attention across many small ones. So once you've chosen your idea, you basically reinforce it by bringing it back into focus at steady intervals. And you return to the idea whenever you get distracted. And you can do this either casually, by every time you notice it, by being slightly more aware of the moment, because the mind at the end of the day learns through simple, consistent reminders. And because all that mental clutter is gone, those reminders will now work a lot better. Or a straightforward way to just take control of this process and not leave it up to your awareness is to just write down your current domino goal 3 times a day, morning, noon, and evening. Now, it doesn't take long, but you're basically training your mind to hold one direction. And the writing will act as a reset each time. So in the morning, you write down your domino goal. It sets the tone for the day. At noon, you write down your domino goal. It basically brings you back on track when the day starts to pull you in different directions. And in the evening, you close the loop, essentially. You just remind yourself of the domino goal you're working towards right now. Now, after a short period of repetition, the idea will begin holding its own place. You won't have to necessarily hold it in your thoughts all the time or write it down all the time. It's still beneficial if you do so, but you'll notice it showing up in your thoughts without any effort on your side. And you'll start making choices that essentially line up with it without having to think too hard. And the idea will become a filter your mind uses automatically. It's a pretty quiet shift, yet it changes the way you move through your day and through your weeks or months. You're no longer reminding yourself of the direction. It's just constantly there. The mind has accepted it as the baseline. This is what it's working towards. And you can do this with any goal. Once you achieve the domino goal, obviously you can set another one and do the same thing. And with enough repetition, the idea will start to settle deeper. It stops feeling like something external you're trying to remember. It becomes part of your internal language. And the mind starts shaping your habits and attention around it, right? And this integration happens when the idea is simple enough and repeated enough. So you'll notice you don't hesitate or procrastinate as much, and you'll get distracted less often. And you'll act in ways that match the idea or the goal before you even think about it. And the mind prefers consistency and frequency. It doesn't always prefer intensity, right? Because you could intensely repeat the same thing for a week. But whenever, and this is the same when we're talking about the gym, you can't be super consistent. You can't work out every day or frequent, and at the same time have the highest intensity possible. So you can't necessarily do PRs every day on the same muscle group, right? The same way with your brain or with your mind. The mind prefers consistency and frequency rather than repeating something for a week as much as possible and then forgetting about it. So when you give it one direction and you remind of it basically here and there over a longer period of time, it will hold that direction without much effort. And as the idea stabilizes, you'll feel less internal noise around it. You check it less. You don't need to write it down as much. You correct yourself less. It becomes a fixed point in your awareness, and it becomes almost like what breath is during meditation. So it becomes basically a focus point to bring you back to the here and now, right? Just like you focus on your breath when you meditate. Every time your thoughts start scattering, you just refocus on your breath. And once the idea is embedded, you will start to act on it consistently without necessarily putting in more effort than usual. One action in line with the idea is just enough to start really creating a visible change. And a clear mind is really a multiplier. It amplifies the force of a simple action. And each aligned step reinforces the internal signal and makes the next one easier. And each time you act in line with the idea, you anchor it deeper, and the mind connects the internal instruction with the real action, with the external action. And it treats the idea as a working part of your identity rather than some kind of a loose intention. And this will create a loop where your thoughts and actions start to feed each other, and your intentions too. And that's also when confidence increases, because what you think, what you intend to do, and what you do are all in line. And with that comes progress. The idea starts shaping what you notice, what you choose and what you ignore, and you catch opportunities that match it. And you skip distractions that pull away from it. And this is what focus is keeping an idea or a goal in your head and reminding yourself of it and acting on it for long enough. And that way your mind isn't overloaded. It's focusing on the one thing. And it has the space and the clarity to follow one direction and follow it well and actually achieve. And you'll achieve way more this way. A lot of people think that if they just set 20 goals, they're going to achieve them all and all of that. And they can work on 20 goals at the same. It doesn't work, guys. Just focus on one thing, complete it, go to the next thing, essentially. Just monotasking. Now, once the idea holds, the vacuum you created becomes a tool instead of a temporary state. And you're working with a mind that's now clear, it's steady, and it's responsive. And you've given it one clean signal, and you've reinforced it through repetition, and now you've grounded it through action afterwards. So with that being said, let's go over the review. We talked about the overview. We went over the clutter problem, the purge ritual, the new input, the review, and finally your action items for the day or the next few days. First, set a 5-minute timer today and unload every loose thought and every loose task onto paper, every open loop. And don't organize it, don't fix anything at first. You're just reducing that internal load so that your mind has room to work again. And then identify a domino goal, pick the one outcome that would make the rest of your responsibilities lighter, and then write it down 3 times today, morning, noon, and evening. Or if it's too late, if you're watching this in the evening, then just start from tomorrow. Or start now, basically just write the evening one. And let the domino goal guide one small action before the day ends. Nothing large, just one step that aligns with the direction you chose. And this will anchor the new input, and it will also begin to shift the environment around you. With that being said, I hope you found this video valuable. If you did, let me know in the comments. Give this video a like, subscribe to the channel for more. If you want to work with me personally, especially if you're an entrepreneur, creator, or professional, then make sure to book a call from the second link in the description. And if you want this training and the document of this training, then make sure to join the free community from the first link in the description. Once again, thank you for being here, and I'm going to see you in the next one.